The dollar bill was still warm in Boone Carter's pocket when he knew with chilling certainty that he'd just signed his own death warrant. For 37 hard years on this unforgiving land, he'd lived by one rule, the first and last rule of the territory. Never ever give up your horse. Not for a bag of gold, not for a skin of water, not for a prayer. And yet, there he stood, alone. Watching his last hope, his horse Solomon, fade into a cloud of red dust. On its back, a wounded Apache girl he didn't even know. This was the same horse meant to carry him to town tomorrow. The same horse he was going to sell for a train ticket east, a final, desperate escape from the ruin his life had become. His ranch was dead. The cattle were bones bleaching in the sun. The creek was a snake of cracked mud. The bank was coming in 3 days, and he had just traded his only way out for a single crumpled dollar. It made no sense. It was the act of a madman. He'd found the girl slumped against a rock, her leg wrapped in a blood-soaked rag. Any decent man would have helped, but a rational man would have slung her over the horse and taken her to the doctor himself. A rational man wouldn't have handed over the reins, handed over his entire future, and accepted a single, worthless dollar bill. So why did he do it? Maybe it was the look in her eyes. Not just pain, but a kind of desperate gratitude that felt like a punch to the gut. The look of someone who had already accepted they were going to die and was shocked to find a reason to live. It was the same look he saw in his own reflection every morning. The look of a man counting down the minutes until he lost everything. Now he had a 20-mile walk home. 20 miles of blistering sun and rattlesnake country with nothing but a dirty dollar and the crushing weight of his own stupidity. He had no way of knowing who that girl was. He had no way of knowing her father was Chief Takakota, a man whose name was whispered with fear and respect from the Rio Grande to the Rockies. He had no way of knowing that the stupidest trait of his life was about to trigger a chain of events that would drench this dry land in blood and revelation. But as the sun began to bleed across the horizon, one thing was certain. He was a dead man walking. He just didn't know it yet. The walk home was a special kind of hell. Each step was a reminder of what he'd lost. Solomon's easy gait replaced by the agonizing grind of his worn-out boots on stone. The blisters started to form within the first hour, hot and angry. The sun was a hammer, beating down on him without mercy. His canteen was half empty, and he had to ration every sip, the warm water barely wetting his cracked lips. He thought about his wife, Martha, gone 5 years now, taken by the fever. She had loved this ranch. She had seen life where he only saw struggle. "Don't you ever give up, Boone," she'd whispered with her last breath. "This land will provide if you just have faith." He'd failed her. He'd given up. Tomorrow was supposed to be the end. He'd sell Solomon and ride the train back to Missouri with his tail between his legs. A failure. Now he couldn't even manage that. He couldn't even fail properly. By the time the sun set, he was delirious. Shapes moved in the purple shadows. The howl of a distant coyote sounded like a funeral dirge. He stumbled, his ankle twisting violently on a loose rock. He went down hard, the impact knocking the wind out of him. He lay there in the dust, the pain in his ankle sharp and blinding. This was it. This was how it ended. Broken and alone, miles from a home that wasn't even his anymore. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the dollar bill. It felt obscene in its worthlessness. He almost threw it away, but some instinct made him stop. He smoothed it out. And that's when he saw it. It wasn't just any dollar. It was an old silver certificate, softer than paper. And in the corner, almost invisible in the fading light, someone had scratched a tiny, perfect image. An eagle in flight, with a single falling feather beneath it. It meant nothing to him. A doodle. A strange mark. He tucked it away and, using a broken branch as a crutch, hauled himself to his feet. The pain was excruciating, but the thought of dying out here, of letting the buzzards pick his bones, was worse. It took him another 3 hours to hobble the last few miles. When he finally saw the dark shape of his small ranch house, he nearly collapsed with relief. The moon was high and bright, painting his failed dream in shades of silver and black. The skeletons of his dead cattle looked like strange lunar sculptures. The dried-up pond was a gaping wound in the earth. He fell onto his porch steps, his body screaming in protest. His ankle was swollen to the size of a melon. He wasn't going anywhere tomorrow. Not to town, not anywhere. He was trapped. And as he sat there, consumed by pain and regret, he heard it. Hoofbeats. Not one horse, many. Moving fast and silent on the dirt trail. Visitors after dark, out here, never meant good news. Boone's heart hammered against his ribs. He reached for the rifle he always kept propped by the door. His hands were shaking, but he forced them steady. He wasn't going to die sitting down. They emerged from the darkness like ghosts. 6 riders, fanning out in a perfect, silent semicircle around his house, boxing him in. They were Apache. Their faces were grim, their eyes hard in the moonlight. And in the center, on a magnificent black stallion, sat a man who radiated power like heat from a fire. His face was a mask of granite, his hair long and gray, adorned with eagle feathers that seemed to drink the moonlight. Boone's blood ran cold. He had seen this man before, in town, from a distance, Chief Takakota, and he looked furious. Boone struggled to his feet, leaning on the rifle like a cane, trying not to show the agony in his ankle. His mind raced. They thought he'd hurt her. They must have found her collapsed somewhere. Or worse. They'd tracked the horse here, and now they were here to exact their revenge. The chief raised a hand, a clear signal to halt. His voice, when he spoke, was low and resonant, carrying across the yard with chilling clarity. You are the man they call Boone Carter. It wasn't a question. It was a judgment. I am, Boone said, his own voice sounding thin and weak. The chief's eyes narrowed, scanning every inch of Boone's broken-down ranch, lingering on the cattle bones, the dry pond, and finally, on Boone himself. My daughter has reached the doctor in Pine Ridge, the chief said. The words offered no relief. His tone was as cold as a winter stone. She told us a white man gave her his horse. Boone's mouth was dry as dust. She was hurt. She needed help. She told us, the chief continued, ignoring Boone's words, that this man took her last dollar for a horse worth 60 times that. A low murmur went through the other riders. Their hands rested on the knives and rifles at their sides. They were a jury, and they had already reached a verdict. Boone started. But what could he say? That he was a fool? That he had acted on an insane impulse? The chief dismounted with a fluid grace that defied his age. He walked forward slowly, his eyes never leaving Boone's. He stopped just a few feet away. My son does not believe your story, he said, gesturing to the rider on his right, a young warrior whose face was a storm cloud of hatred. He believes you are a coward. That you saw my daughter was wounded, and you tricked her. That you took her money, whatever she had, and sent her away on a tired horse to die, so you would not be blamed. The accusation hung in the air, more deadly than a poised snake. That was it. That was what they believed. Not an act of charity, but an act of monstrous cruelty. That's not what happened, Boone whispered, his voice cracking. Then tell me, Boone Carter. The chief's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Why does a man at the end of his rope, a man who has lost everything, give his only escape to a stranger? To an Apache? The question was a trap. There was no right answer. If he said it was pity, they would see it as condescension. If he said it was kindness, they would call him a liar. Desperate, his mind fumbled for proof, for anything, and his hand went to his pocket. She paid me, he said, pulling out the crumpled silver certificate. It was a trade. She wanted the horse. This is what she gave me. He held it out. The chief didn't take it. He just stared at the worn bill in Boone's trembling hand. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind sighing through the bones of the dead cattle. Then, slowly, the chief leaned closer, his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, fixed on the corner of the bill, on the tiny, scratched drawing of the eagle with the falling feather. The air went still. The unreadable granite of the chief's face seemed to crack. A flicker of disbelief, then shock, then something else Boone couldn't name. He looked from the dollar bill to Boone's face, and then back again. The fury in his eyes was replaced by a profound, earth-shattering confusion. He spoke a single word in Apache, a guttural question to his son. The young warrior, Nalnish, leaned down from his horse to look. He saw the marking, and his own jaw tightened. He spat on the ground, but his hatred now seemed mixed with bewilderment. "Where?" Chief Takakota said, his voice now tight with a new, strange emotion. "Did you get this?" "The girl," Boone stammered. "Your daughter. She gave it to me." "That is impossible," the chief stated flatly. "That marking, it is a sacred sign, a bond. It has not been seen in 2 generations. It belonged to my grandfather's grandfather." He finally took the bill from Boone's hand, holding it as if it were a holy relic. "This symbol means the holder is under the tribe's protection, that they are kin, an ally to whom all debts must be paid. For my daughter to give you this, she did not buy your horse." The chief looked up, his eyes boring into Boone's, searching for a truth that defied all logic. "She made you family." The revelation silenced the night. The Apache riders, who moments ago were ready to kill him, now stared at Boone with a mixture of awe and suspicion. He was no longer just a white rancher. He was a paradox, an impossibility. Chief Takakota folded the silver certificate with reverent care and tucked it inside his leather vest. The air of menace was gone, replaced by a heavy, contemplative gravity. "This changes things," he said, more to himself than to Boone. He turned and issued a sharp command in Apache. 2 of the riders dismounted instantly. They approached Boone, and for a terrifying second, he thought they were going to seize him. Instead, one of them gently took the rifle from his grasp, while the other knelt and examined his swollen ankle with surprising skill. "You are injured," the chief observed. The walk was not kind. The rider looked up and spoke to the chief, pointing back down the trail. Takakota nodded. "My men will fetch herbs from the creek bed to make a poultice. You will stay here." It was not a request. Boone, bewildered and in pain, allowed himself to be guided to his porch steps. The chief stood before him, the moonlight carving deep lines into his face. Nalnish, his son, remained mounted, his expression still hostile, but now laced with a frustrated confusion. He was a man whose entire worldview had just been shattered, and he didn't like it. "A man who holds the sign of the falling feather cannot be left to fail," the chief said quietly. He swept his arm, indicating the desolate ranch. "This land is dying, but it was not always so." He walked over to the dried-up creek bed, Boone's eyes following him. He knelt, scooping up a handful of cracked earth. "My grandfather taught me that water has a memory. It does not always flow where men can see it. White settlers dig their wells where it is convenient. They see a dry surface and they believe the land is thirsty." He let the dust sift through his fingers. "They are wrong." He stood and pointed to a cluster of old cottonwood trees, a quarter-mile north of the house. 30 years ago, this creek ran deep and clear. It was fed by an underground spring. The spring is not dead. It is merely sleeping. 15 feet beneath those trees, there is enough water to bring this entire valley back to life. Boone's heart began to pound. An underground spring? He dug a dozen wells, chasing whispers of water, finding nothing but rock and dust. "Why are you telling me this?" Boone asked, his voice hoarse. "Because the sign you hold commands it," the chief answered simply. "But water is only the beginning. Water cannot turn dust into pasture." He walked back to his horse and took a small leather pouch from his saddle. He returned and poured a stream of tiny dark seeds into Boone's palm. "Buffalo grass," he said, "a special strain our people have cultivated for generations. It has deep roots. It can survive the worst droughts. Plant this, give it the water from the deep spring, and in 2 seasons you will have the richest grazing land in this territory." Boone stared at the seeds. They felt heavier than gold. This was life. This was a second chance he hadn't dared to even dream of. But it felt too easy. Too much. Too fast. "There is more," the chief said, his eyes now glinting with a shrewd, calculating light. "This ranch sits on a valuable trail. Wagon trains pass through, heading for the markets in Santa Fe. They have nowhere to rest their animals, nowhere to buy fresh supplies. A man with endless water and rich grass could build a prosperous way station." The idea hit Boone like a physical blow. A trading post, a steady income, a future. "We have goods," the chief continued, his voice dropping. "Silver jewelry, fine pottery, woven blankets. Goods that wagon travelers pay high prices for. But they do not trust us. They will not trade with us. They need a bridge, someone who can stand in both worlds." Boone finally understood. His world was spinning. "You're offering me a partnership." "I am offering you a way to fulfill the bond my daughter created," the chief corrected him. "You will provide the location. You will handle the white travelers. We will provide the goods and the knowledge to make this land whole again. The profits will be shared. Equally. 12 hours ago, he was a ruined man planning to flee. Now he was being handed the keys to a kingdom he never knew existed. It was a miracle, a fever dream born of his agonizing walk home. "Why?" Boone asked, the single word encompassing all his disbelief. "Why trust me with all this?" Chief Takakota placed a hand on Boone's shoulder. Its weight was grounding, real. "Because my daughter, in her wisdom, saw something in you. And because any man willing to trade his future for the life of an Apache girl can be trusted with the future of my people." He paused, and for the first time, his expression tightened. The calculating look returned to his eyes. "But this gift is not without a price. Knowledge, partnership. These things must be earned." The other riders were stirring. The 2 who had gone for herbs were returning. The conversation was ending. "What's the catch?" Boone asked, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. This felt too good to be true. The chief's faint smile vanished. His face became granite once more. "The girl, my Ayana, her wound was not from a fall." Boone's blood went cold. "She was shot," the chief said, his voice a low, deadly rumble. "From ambush, with a white man's rifle." He leaned in close, his voice dropping so only Boone could hear. "Tomorrow, a wagon train will arrive here. The man who tried to murder my daughter is with them. He is their guide." The chief straightened up, his eyes locking onto Boone's. "Your test, Boone Carter, is not about water or grass. It's about justice. You will help us find this man. You will stand with us when we deliver our judgment." He looked over at his son, Nalnish, whose hand now rested on the hilt of a long knife, his eyes burning with a cold, patient fire. "And if you refuse," the chief finished, his voice like the scrape of stone on bone, "the sign of the falling feather will be washed away in your blood." The dawn broke, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and red. For Boone, it felt less like a sunrise and more like a wound opening in the sky. He hadn't slept. The Apache riders had made a poultice for his ankle that had miraculously eased the swelling, but his mind had been a battlefield. One path led to a partnership, a future, salvation. The other led to a shallow grave. and the toll bridge between them was a confrontation with a killer. Just as the sun cleared the horizon, two riders appeared. It was Chief Takakota and his son, Nalnish. They dismounted, and Boone saw that Nalnish was carrying a long, cloth-wrapped object. "The wagon train is 2 hours away," the chief announced without preamble. "We must prepare." "Prepare for what?" Boone asked, his throat dry. "A gunfight?" "We seek justice, not war," the chief said calmly. But Nalnish's eyes told a different story. They were hungry for war. "The man we seek is named Clayton Wells. He is known in this territory. He boasts of the Apache scalps he has taken." The name sent a chill down Boone's spine. Clayton Wells. He was more than a guide. He was a notorious Indian fighter, a man who left a trail of bodies wherever he went. Ayanna did not see his face clearly, the chief continued, but she saw his rifle. It was a Sharps model, with a silver star inlaid on the stock, a vanity piece. He will not be parted from it. Nalnish stepped forward and unwrapped the object he carried. It was an old, beautifully crafted Apache bow and a quiver of arrows. He held them out to Boone. "My father believes you are an ally," Nalnish said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I believe you are a sheep who will hide when the wolf comes, but if you are to stand with us, you will not do so empty-handed." Boone looked at the bow. He hadn't fired an arrow since he was a boy. "My rifle is loud," the chief cut in. "It announces its intention to the whole world. Secrecy will be our ally today. You must watch Wells. You must get close to him. Confirm the rifle. The rest will be our concern." Boone understood. They were using him as a scout, a Trojan horse. His white face was his camouflage. "There is something else," the chief said, his gaze becoming distant. Ayanna was not his only target. She was riding with her cousin. He was killed. Wells took his scalp. The words landed like stones. This wasn't just about a wounded girl. It was about a murder they intended to avenge. "So what's the plan?" Boone asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I spot the rifle, and you attack?" "The plan," the chief said, "is for you to do what you were meant to do. Runaway station. You will offer them water and grazing. You will negotiate a price. You will act as if this is the most important business deal of your life." Nalnish scoffed. "While a murderer drinks from your well." "Exactly," the chief confirmed, his eyes locking with his son's in a silent battle of wills. "He must feel safe. He must believe this is just another dusty ranch run by a desperate man. His guard must be down." A dust cloud was now visible on the eastern horizon. It was small, but it was growing. The wagon train was coming. "My father places too much faith in you, white man," Nalnish snarled, his patience finally breaking. "You will serve them water. You will take their money. And when the time comes to act, you will choose their side. Your skin is your loyalty." "My loyalty," Boone said, meeting the young warrior's hateful stare, "is to the girl who trusted me." The chief nodded slowly, a flicker of something like approval in his eyes. He pointed to the approaching dust cloud. "They are coming, Boone Carter. Show us who you are." The two Apache men melted back into the rocks and scrub brush, disappearing so completely it was as if they had never been there. Boone was alone again, but this time the solitude was terrifying. He was the bait in a trap, and he had no idea if he would survive the spring. The wagon train creaked to a halt 100 yards from his house, a circle of dusty, sun-beaten schooners. Families, hollow-eyed and weary, peered out from beneath the canvas covers. Their livestock was thin, their water barrels ominously quiet when jostled. These people were desperate. But the man who rode at the head of the train wasn't desperate. He was dangerous. Clayton Wells sat his horse like a king on a throne of leather and sweat. He was lean and wiry, with eyes the color of a washed-out sky. A long, greasy scar ran down his left cheek. And resting in the scabbard on his saddle was the rifle, a Sharps model. and even from this distance, Boone could see it. The sun glinted off a small silver star inlaid on the polished stock. A wave of nausea rolled through Boone. It was him. The man was right here, smiling a lazy, confident smile. "Well now," Wells called out, his voice a gravelly drawl. "Look what we have here, a ranch. Anyone home?" Boone took a breath and walked forward, forcing a calm he did not feel. "Afternoon. Name's Boone Carter. This is my place." Wells dismounted, his eyes sweeping over the property, dismissing it all as worthless in a single glance. "Clayton Wells, trail guide. These good folks are in need of water and a place to graze their stock for the night. What are your prices?" This was it, the test. "I've got water," Boone said, his voice steady. "Deepest, coldest well in the territory. That'll be 50 cents a family. Grazing is 25 cents an animal. The grass is rich." Wells raised an eyebrow. "Confident, ain't you, for a man running a boneyard?" He gestured to the cattle skulls. "Things are turning around," Boone said simply. Wells seemed to accept this. He turned to the travelers. "All right, folks. 50 cents for water, quarter a head for grazing. Line up and pay the man." It was happening too easily. A knot of suspicion tightened in Boone's gut. This was the man who murdered Apaches for sport. Why was he so agreeable? As the families began to form a line, their faces etched with relief, a woman carrying a small child approached Boone. "Mister, do you have any supplies? Fresh meat? Vegetables? We've been on hardtack for a week." Before Boone could answer, Wells stepped in, placing a friendly hand on the woman's shoulder. Now, Mary, let's not trouble the man. I'll take a few of the boys out hunting this evening. We'll have fresh meat for everyone by sundown." He was being helpful, generous, even. It was all wrong. Boone watched as Wells moved through the camp, speaking with the families, smiling, playing with the children. He was their savior, their guide, the man leading them to the promised land. He wasn't the monster Chief Takakota described. Or, his mask was perfect. An hour passed. The travelers paid, watered their stock, and began to set up their camp. Boone's pockets were heavier than they had been in years. The first part of the chief's prophecy was coming true. The way station was a success. But the second part, the justice, felt impossibly far away. Wells eventually ambled over to Boone, who was standing by the well he'd miraculously dug that morning, right where the chief had told him to. "This is good water," Wells said, taking a sip from the dipper. "You're a lucky man, Carter, finding a spring like this in this godforsaken dust bowl." "I had some help," Boone said carefully. "Oh yeah?" Wells's eyes sharpened for a fraction of a second. "From who?" "Just some local knowledge," Boone replied, trying to sound vague. Wells grunted, seemingly satisfied with the answer. He leaned against the well, his rifle propped next to him. The silver star winked in the sunlight, mocking Boone. "You know," Wells said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone, "a man could make a fortune out here, if he knows the territory, if he ain't afraid to get his hands dirty." He looked around the camp, then fixed his pale eyes on Boone. "This is a good spot. But it's unprotected. You know who lives in these hills, don't you?" "I've heard the stories," Boone said. "Stories?" Wells let out a short, harsh laugh. "They ain't stories. They're savages, liars, thieves, killers, every last one." He patted the stock of his rifle. "Me and old Stella here, we've made this trail safe for these folks, sent more than a few of those red devils to their maker." He was boasting, openly boasting about killing them. The casual cruelty of it made Boone's stomach turn. "So, what's your point?" Boone asked. Wells smiled, a slow, predatory curving of his lips. The mask was slipping. "My point, Carter, is that for a small fee, say, a percentage of what you're making here, I could offer you my protection. Me and a few of my boys could stick around for a while. Make sure no Apaches come sniffing around your new little enterprise. The offer landed. It wasn't a business proposition. It was an ultimatum. Extortion. This was his game. He wasn't just a guide, he was a racketeer. But before Boone could respond, a commotion broke out near the wagons. A man was shouting, "My wallet, it's gone! Somebody stole my wallet!" Wells sighed, pushing himself off the well. Trouble in paradise. He started walking toward the camp, then paused and looked back at Boone. "Think about my offer, Carter," he said, his voice once again friendly and helpful. "We're all just trying to survive out here, right?" As Wells walked away, Boone realized the terrifying truth. The chief was wrong. Wells wasn't just a killer. He was smart, he was charming, and he had this entire wagon train wrapped around his little finger. How could they possibly bring a man like that to justice when his victims were the very people who trusted him most? The trap wasn't for Wells. It was for Boone. The accusation of theft sent a ripple of paranoia through the camp. People checked their belongings, casting suspicious glances at their neighbors. The man who'd lost his wallet, a portly merchant named Silas, was pointing a shaking finger at a young man who had been helping him unhitch his oxen. "It was him! I saw him!" Silas bellowed. Wells strode into the middle of the conflict, the very picture of calm authority. All right, let's everyone just settle down. Silas, are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure. He was the only one near my wagon." Wells turned to the young man, whose face was pale with terror. "Son, what's your name?" It's Tom," the boy stammered. "Well, Tom," Wells said, his voice soft and reasonable. "Did you take this man's wallet?" "No, sir. I swear. I was just helping with the harness." Wells nodded, stroking his chin thoughtfully. He looked around at the gathered faces, all of them watching, waiting for his judgment. Boone watched too, a cold dread seeping into his bones. This was a performance. "Folks," Wells said, raising his voice so everyone could hear, "we've been on the trail a long time. Tempers are frayed. Let's not jump to conclusions." He turned back to Tom. "Son, would you mind if I just had a look in your pockets, just to clear this all up?" Tom, looking desperate for any way to prove his innocence, quickly nodded and turned out his pockets. They were empty, save for a lint-covered piece of hard candy. Silas sputtered, "Well, he must have hid it." "Perhaps," Wells said smoothly. He then did something Boone didn't expect. He walked over to Silas's wagon and began to look around. After a moment, he reached under the driver's seat. "Well, I'll be," he said, pulling out a leather wallet. "Looks like it just fell, Silas. No harm, no foul." Silas's face went from red to purple. He mumbled an apology to Tom. The crowd dispersed, relieved. Wells had solved the problem. He was the hero once again. But Boone had been watching Wells's hands. It was a classic sleight of hand, a pickpocket's trick in reverse. Wells had likely lifted the wallet himself earlier, then found it to solidify his position as the trustworthy leader. He'd created the problem, so he could be the one to solve it. He wasn't just a killer and an extortionist. He was a con man. Later, as the sun began to set, Wells sought Boone out again. He was carrying 2 tin cups and a bottle of whiskey. "A little something to celebrate our first day as potential partners," Wells said, pouring a generous amount into each cup. Boone wanted to refuse, but he knew that would raise suspicion. He took the cup. "I saw what you did," Boone said, his voice low. "With the wallet." Wells's smile didn't falter. He took a long drink from his cup. "Just keeping the peace. A good leader knows his flock. Sometimes they need a little drama to keep 'em from thinking about their real troubles." "And what are their real troubles?" Boone asked. "That they're weak. Lost. They paid me to get 'em to California, but what they really paid for was a man to tell 'em what to do, what to think, who to trust, who to hate." He leaned in closer. "And right now, they trust me." The threat was clear. cross me, and I'll turn them all against you." "Your protection racket," Boone said, testing him. "You pull this with every way station you pass?" "It ain't a racket, Carter. It's a service," Wells corrected him. "I provide security. I keep the savages at bay." He took another drink. "Speaking of which, I saw tracks on the trail coming in. Shod ponies, Apache." He was watching Boone's face, gauging his reaction. "I told you," Wells continued, his voice turning hard. "They're everywhere, and they'd love nothing more than to raid a place like this. Steal your water, your money, your life." He finished his whiskey and set the cup down with a sharp click. "You've got until morning to decide, Carter. Are you with me or are you with them?" He walked away, leaving Boone alone with the setting sun and the cup of whiskey he hadn't touched. The trap was closing. Wells was trying to force him to choose a side, but Boone knew the truth. There weren't two sides. There was only Wells and everyone he used as a pawn. He looked out toward the rocks where the chief and his son were hiding. They were out there, waiting for a signal, waiting for Boone to confirm the rifle. But how could he give that signal without bringing a bloodbath down on all the innocent families in the camp? Wells had made himself untouchable. And as darkness fell, Boone realized something even more terrifying. The chief's plan couldn't work. A direct confrontation was impossible. If justice was going to be done, it would have to be done another way, and he was the only one who could do it. Night fell like a shroud. The campfires of the travelers dotted the darkness, their laughter and talk drifting on the cool air. They were oblivious, content in the bubble of safety Wells had created for them. Boone sat on his porch, the Apache bow lying across his lap. It felt alien in his hands, a relic from a world he didn't understand. He was a rancher, a farmer, not a warrior, not an assassin. He thought about Ayanna, about the look in her eyes. He thought about her cousin, dead and scalped. He couldn't let Wells just ride away in the morning. He couldn't. He saw a shadow detach itself from the deeper darkness near the cottonwood trees. It moved with a predator's silence. It was Nalnish. The young warrior materialized at the edge of the porch, his face a mask of impatience. "You have seen the rifle," he hissed. "You have been with him all day. Why do you wait? Give the signal." "It's not that simple," Boone said, his voice a low whisper. "He's not what we thought. He has these people convinced he's their savior. If we attack him, they'll fight for him. Women, children, they'll be caught in the middle." "They are white," Nalnish spat. "They will always side with a killer of their own kind. It is their way." "Maybe," Boone conceded, "but they don't deserve to die for it." Nalnish's hand went to his knife. "My cousin deserved to live. My sister nearly died. Your cowardice dishonors the sign you carry." "This isn't about cowardice," Boone shot back, his own anger rising. "It's about being smart. Your father's plan was to confront him, but you can't confront a snake by shouting at it. You have to draw it out." Nalnish stared at him, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need a new plan," Boone said, his mind racing, an idea taking shape, born of desperation and the things he'd learned about Wells that day. "He's a thief, a con man. His greed is his weakness. We can't beat him with force. We have to beat him at his own game." He told Nalnish about the extortion, about the staged theft of the wallet. He explained how Wells had woven a web of trust and dependency around the travelers. As he spoke, Nalnish's furious impatience slowly gave way to a grudging understanding. He was a warrior, but he was also a hunter. He understood the value of a well-laid trap. "What is this new plan?" Nalnish asked, the contempt in his voice replaced by a sliver of curiosity. "He offered me protection," Boone explained. "He wants a cut of my profits. I'm going to accept his offer." Nalnish looked at him as if he'd gone insane. "You will pay him?" "I'll do more than that," Boone said, the plan solidifying in his mind. I'm going to tell him about my new partners, my silent partners, who have a cache of silver they need to transport. Silver from a secret mine in the hills. The lie came easily. It felt right. Nalnish's eyes lit up with a dark fire. He was beginning to understand. The greed of the white man is a river with no end. Exactly, Boone said. He won't be able to resist. He'll see a bigger score than just shaking down a poor rancher. He'll want all of it. He'll betray the wagon train. He'll try to rob us. And when he does, Nalnish whispered, a cruel smile finally touching his lips, he will no longer be their hero. He will be just another thief, and we will be waiting. But we need proof, Boone insisted. We need to expose him in front of everyone. No secret revenge in the dark. It has to be out in the open. Justice, not just vengeance. Nalnish considered this for a long moment. The desire for a bloody, immediate revenge warred with the cold logic of Boone's plan. Finally, he gave a sharp nod. I will tell my father. But if you are wrong, if this is a trick, I will have your scalp myself. He vanished back into the darkness as silently as he had come. Boone was left alone, his heart pounding. He had just lied to the son of an Apache chief, committing them both to a dangerous deception. He now had to face Clayton Wells and convince a master conman that he was falling for the oldest trick in the book. And hope he didn't see the truth in Boone's eyes, that this wasn't about silver, it was about blood. Morning came. Boone found Wells overseeing the harnessing of the wagon teams, preparing for the day's departure. Wells, Boone called out, I've thought about your offer. Wells turned, a lazy, knowing smile on his face. He expected capitulation. And I'm in, Boone said. You were right. A man can't be too careful. Wells's smile widened. Wise decision, Carter, very wise. I'll take, say, 20% of your daily take, a bargain for the peace of mind I provide. 20% is fair, Boone agreed, but I have a counter-proposal, something that could be worth a lot more to you than just shaking down travelers for pocket change. He had his attention. The hook was set. I'm listening, Wells said, his pale eyes glinting with interest. Boone lowered his voice, forcing a conspiratorial tone. The local knowledge I mentioned yesterday, it comes from my new partners, a small band of Apache prospectors. They found a silver vein up in the hills, a rich one. He paused, letting the words sink in. Wells's expression didn't change, but a new stillness came over him. They're smart enough to know they can't sell it themselves, Boone continued, spinning the lie. They need a white man to move it, me. They're bringing the first shipment here tonight, a test run. If it goes well, there's more, a lot more. Apaches, Wells said, the word a soft curse. You're in business with them. He wasn't angry. He was intrigued. He saw an angle. Business is business, Boone said with a shrug. But here's the problem. They don't trust me completely. And frankly, I don't trust them. A man could get a knife in the back dealing with their kind. This, he knew, Wells would believe. So, Boone concluded, I need protection, not just from other raiders, but from my own partners. I want you and your men to be here tonight when the silver arrives, as my security. Wells was silent for a long moment, processing. Boone could practically see the gears turning in his head. The failing rancher, the secret silver mine, the untrustworthy Apache partners. It was a perfect setup for a double cross. How much silver are we talking about? Wells asked, his voice casual. Too casual. Enough to fill 2 heavy saddlebags, Boone said, and they say that's just a taste. And what's my cut for this security work? 20%, Boone offered, same as the way station deal. Wells laughed, a genuine, unrestrained laugh. Carter, you really are new to this game. 20% for sitting on a silver mine? You must think I'm a fool. What do you want? Boone asked. 50, Wells said flatly. 50% of the whole take. I'll handle your Apache problem for you, permanently, and we split the mine, you and me, 50-50. It was exactly what Boone had hoped for. He had offered the bait, and Wells had swallowed it whole, already planning to cut out the Apaches and Boone himself in due time. 50% is steep, Boone said, feigning reluctance. It's the only deal on the table, Wells said. Take it or leave it. I've got a wagon train to lead. All right, Boone said, letting out a sigh. Deal. You and your men stay, but what do you tell these people? He gestured to the travelers, who were watching them curiously. Wells grinned. Don't you worry about that. I'm the expert at telling people what they need to hear. He walked to the center of the camp and clapped his hands for attention. Folks, listen up. A slight change of plans. Mr. Carter here has generously hired us to provide some extra security for his fine establishment. Seems there's been some Apache activity in the area. We'll be staying put for another day or two, just to make sure the trail ahead is safe for you all. Your safety is my #1 priority. A murmur of approval went through the crowd. They weren't being delayed. They were being protected. Their hero was looking out for them. Wells walked back over to Boone. See? Easy. He selected 3 of his men, including a hulking, bearded brute named Burke, who looked like he wrestled bears for fun. He sent the rest of the wagon train ahead under the command of his second in charge. Just a day's ride, Wells told them. We'll catch up. Go on now. The trap was set. The players were in position. That night, Chief Takakota's riders would arrive, not as a war party, but as prospectors carrying bags of worthless rocks. And Clayton Wells, blinded by greed, would walk right into the center of the stage, ready to play the part Boone had written for him, ready to show everyone his true face. As evening approached, the tension on the ranch was a palpable thing. Wells and his 3 men, Burke, a wiry little weasel named Fitch, and a quiet, dead-eyed man named Cobb, had made themselves at home, drinking Boone's whiskey and cleaning their guns. They were relaxed, confident, anticipating an easy score. Boone's heart hammered in his chest. So much could go wrong. The chief's riders could be too aggressive. Wells could sense the trap. A single stray bullet could turn the whole thing into a massacre. He saw movement in the rocks. It was time. They're coming, Boone said, his voice tight. Wells and his men stood, moving into the shadows around the barn, their rifles ready. They thought they were setting an ambush for the Apaches. In reality, they were the ones being ambushed. 5 riders emerged from the darkness. It was Nalnish, leading 4 other warriors. They were dressed simply, not as a war party. Their horses were loaded with heavy-looking leather saddlebags. They looked exactly like the prospectors from Boone's story. Nalnish rode forward and dismounted in the yard. Carter, he grunted, we have the silver. Bring it into the barn, Boone said, playing his part. We'll weigh it there. As Nalnish and his men began to unload the saddlebags, Wells and his crew stepped out from the shadows, their rifles leveled. Well, 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 Wells drawled. Look what the cat dragged in. Nalnish and his warriors froze. They feigned surprise and fear perfectly, raising their hands slowly. This is my security, Boone said quickly, stepping between the 2 groups. I told you I didn't trust you. Wells laughed. Your security? That's funny. See, I think you've misunderstood the situation. He gestured with his rifle toward Nalnish. I think you and your friends are going to leave the silver and ride away, and if you're lucky, you'll get to keep your hair. This was it. The moment of betrayal. But Boone needed more. He needed everyone to see it. Wells, what are you doing? Boone demanded. We had a deal. Your deal was with a fool, Carter, Wells sneered. My deal is with myself. Now drop the bags. But as he spoke, lights suddenly flared up all around the camp. Lanterns, dozens of them, held by the families of the wagon train. They hadn't gone on ahead. At the front of the crowd stood an older, distinguished-looking man Boone recognized as Samuel Henderson, a man who had been watching the day's events with a thoughtful, intelligent gaze. "What the hell is this?" Wells snarled, momentarily stunned. "It appears the show is about to begin, Mr. Wells," Henderson said, his voice calm and carrying. "And we all wanted front row seats." Wells realized he'd been played. His face contorted with rage. "You!" he screamed at Boone. "You set me up!" "No, Wells," Boone said, his voice ringing out for all to hear. "You set yourself up. You told these people you were their protector, but you were willing to abandon them, to leave them on the trail, for a bag of silver." A gasp went through the crowd of travelers. They were looking at Wells, their hero, with new, horrified eyes. "He's a liar!" Wells shouted, trying to regain control. "It's a trick. These are savages, here to rob us all." "Are they?" Henderson said. He nodded to Nalnish. "Son, would you mind showing us what's in those bags?" Nalnish, a grim smile on his face, opened one of the saddlebags and dumped its contents onto the ground. It wasn't silver. It was a pile of ordinary, worthless rocks. The crowd stared, bewildered. "There is no mine," Boone announced. "There is no silver. There is only your greed, Wells." The mask was gone. Wells's face was a snarl of pure hatred. He was exposed, his lies stripped bare in front of the very people he had manipulated. "You're a dead man, Carter," he hissed. But Henderson took another step forward. "The only dead man here, Mr. Wells, is the one you murdered 2 days ago." He was looking directly at Wells, but he was speaking to the crowd. "This man didn't just abandon you for profit. He is the reason we are in danger. He led a young Apache man into an ambush, killed him, and tried to murder his cousin. The Apache activity he warned you about, he caused it." The final piece of the puzzle snapped into place. The travelers stared at Wells, their trust finally irrevocably shattered. He wasn't their protector. He was a monster who had put all of their lives at risk. Wells knew it was over. His reputation was destroyed. His freedom was gone. With a wild scream of rage, he raised his rifle, the one with the silver star, and aimed it straight at Boone, but he never fired. An arrow, silent and impossibly fast, sprouted from his shoulder. He cried out in pain and surprise, dropping the rifle. Another arrow took Burke in the leg. Fitch and Cobb, seeing it was hopeless, threw down their guns. From the darkness, Chief Takakota emerged, a bow in his hand. He was flanked by a dozen more warriors, who had surrounded the camp while the drama unfolded. The trap had sprung. Clayton Wells stood, clutching his shoulder, his face a mask of agony and defeat. He was surrounded by the people he'd betrayed, the people he'd hunted, and the man he'd underestimated. Justice had come to the dusty ranch, and everyone was there to witness it. In the aftermath, a quiet, solemn order replaced the chaos. Chief Takakota's warriors, moving with disciplined efficiency, tied up Wells and his 3 men. The travelers, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning anger, watched in silence. They had been living a lie, and the truth was a harsh awakening. Samuel Henderson, the older man who had revealed Wells's crime, approached Boone. "You took a bigger risk than you know, Mr. Carter," he said, his eyes filled with a tired wisdom. "What do you mean?" Boone asked. "Why didn't the wagon train leave?" "I suspected our Mr. Wells was not what he seemed," Henderson explained. "I've been on many trails, and men like him leave a certain scent of rot. When he announced this sudden delay, I convinced the others to make a cold camp just over the ridge, to wait, to watch. It seems my instincts were correct." He looked over at Chief Takakota, who was now speaking in low tones with his son. "You've done more than expose a killer tonight. You may have prevented a war." The chief approached them. He stopped before Boone, his gaze intense. "The debt is paid," he said. He looked at the captured Wells, whose face was pale with pain and fear. "His fate will be decided by our laws, and by the laws of your people." He nodded toward Henderson. "We will turn him over to the nearest fort." Justice, not vengeance. Boone felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees. The next morning, the Apache riders departed, taking Wells and his men with them. The wagon train prepared to leave as well, but this time, the atmosphere was different. As they filed past, the travelers didn't just glance at Boone. They nodded. They thanked him. The woman with the small child pressed a freshly baked loaf of bread into his hands. They saw him not as a failed rancher, but as a man of principle. Samuel Henderson was the last to leave. He shook Boone's hand. "I suspect your way station is going to become very well known, Mr. Carter," he said with a smile. "Honesty is a rare commodity in this territory. Word will spread." And then they were gone. The ranch was quiet again. Boone stood alone in the silence, the morning sun warming his face. He looked at his land. He saw the spot where the well now gave life. He saw the pouch of buffalo grass seeds on his porch. He saw the future the chief had offered him. It was real, all of it. He had earned it. 6 months passed. The land transformed as if by magic, the magic of water and hard work. The buffalo grass grew thick and green, a lush carpet spread across the valley. Boone's small herd of cattle grew fat and healthy, and he bought more. The spring fed a clear, deep pond where there had once been only cracked earth. But the biggest change was the way station. True to Henderson's word, its reputation had spread like a wildfire. Carter's Crossing, they called it, a place of fair trade, honest dealings, and the coldest, sweetest water west of the Mississippi. It became a vital stop on the Santa Fe Trail. The partnership with the Apache flourished. Every week, they brought their goods, pottery, blankets, silver, and the travelers bought them eagerly. The bridge the chief had spoken of was real. It was built of trust, right here on Boone's land. One afternoon, Boone was watching a group of Apache children playing with the children from a visiting wagon train near the pond. He heard hoofbeats and turned. It was Chief Takakota. Beside him walked a young woman, her back straight, her eyes bright and full of life. It was Ayanna, and the chief was leading a horse, a familiar brown mare, her coat gleaming with health. Solomon. "I believe this is yours," the chief said, his face breaking into a rare, genuine smile. Boone was speechless. He walked to his old horse and ran a hand down its neck. "I never thought I'd see him again." "He was alone," the chief said, "not a purchase." Ayanna stepped forward. Her English was much improved. "Mr. Carter, I have wanted to thank you properly." She reached into a pouch at her waist and pulled out a worn, folded piece of paper, the silver certificate. "This belongs to you," she said, holding it out. The trade was not fair. Boone looked at the dollar bill. He looked at his thriving ranch, at the peaceful scene by the pond, at the horse that had been his last hope, now returned to him. He looked at the girl, whose life he had traded it for. He gently pushed her hand back. "Keep it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That was the best dollar I ever spent." He had traded his past for a single dollar, and in return, he'd been given a future richer than any silver mine, a future built not on what a man takes from the world, but on what he is willing to give. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. We have a new tale coming next week that you won't want to miss, where a lonely lighthouse keeper discovers he's not the only one keeping watch over the stormy sea. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you in the next one.